Yes, hello. It's Jason Louv. Welcome back to the Ultra Culture Podcast. This is coming out on Memorial Day, 2023. And because it's Memorial Day, we have a big announcement. Yes, we are launching a new course. And this one is with a new teacher that you probably know, Lon Milo DuQuette, who I am very honored to have join the Magick.me team. I consider Lon the best teacher of magic and tarot in the world. I like to think I'm pretty good, but Lon is the master, and Lon has been teaching magic since 1971. I really love Lon. I have a ton of respect for him, and so I'm really excited to announce this. I've been kind of keeping this under wraps for a while now. The course is called The Magick of Tarot. It is now out. You can see it at tarot.magick.me, magick.me. This is a tremendous course. I've been working on it very heavily for the last 2 months. Lon and I have been working on it together, and it's now out. This is a tremendous course. You can take this course if you're completely new to tarot and basically get up to speed right away. You're not only going to learn what tarot is, you're not only going to learn how to read tarot, but you're going to discover that tarot is the ultimate book of magic. It's the ultimate book of initiation. That's why it's called the Book of Thoth. Thoth is the Egyptian god of magic. And what the tarot is the core, preeminent, most important system of divination and repository of knowledge of Western civilization. I would say the same thing about the I Ching for China, but for Europe, it's the tarot. It's one of the most important artifacts of world culture. And of course, it can be used as not only a system of divination, but as a tool for enlightenment. In this course, Lon walks you through all of the inner mechanics of the tarot, the esoteric stuff. He goes deep into the Kabbalah. He goes deep into the Hebrew alphabet. He goes even into the links of the tarot to, for instance, Enochian. And he talks about the spirits of the tarot. There's actually spirits in each card that he teases out and shows you how to access. This is the ultimate course in tarot for both beginners and advanced students. I've been doing tarot for 25 years, but I learned a whole lot of new stuff just taking this course and working on it. Even though I've taken courses from Lon before, I learned a ton working on this course. This is not hyperbole when I say that Lon DuQuette is the world's preeminent master of tarot. I don't think that that's disputable. His book, Understanding Thoth Tarot, that he teaches out of in this course is well recognized around the world, including in Asia, as the number one book on the subject. Lon is a world treasure, and I'm just very happy to present this course. So you don't need anything to participate in this course. It helps to bring along a tarot deck, but you don't need it. You can go in completely fresh, knowing nothing about tarot. You can go in knowing something about tarot, knowing something about magic, perhaps having taken other courses on Magick.me, which it syncs with very well. Or you can go in as an advanced student with 20, 30 years of experience, and I guarantee you're going to break new ground. You're going to learn new stuff. In addition to that, Lon actually leads an 1.5-hour guided meditation, a pathworking going through all 22 Trump's major arcana. So in addition to learning all of this stuff, you're going to get to experience it with a true master. He's going to guide you through a pathworking all the way up to the top of the tree of life. That's a phenomenal opportunity. Also, at the end of the course, you're going to get to make your own tarot deck. I know a lot of people who take my courses are artists, and I'm always super excited and happy to see the stuff that they come up with. Lon's going to teach you all the inner mathematics and workings and engineering of the tarot, so that you're not just going to be learning like correspondences or what the art means. You're going to understand the code behind the tarot, why each card is the way it is. And at the end of the course, you're going to be able to use that, bring it all together to create your own deck, maybe even sell it. Like we're going to show you how to sell it as a print-on-demand deck if you want to do that, if you're entrepreneurially inclined. But that aside, you're going to be able to manifest your own arcana, your own book of initiation. And we're going to give you all the tools to do that in this course. We're going to give you tons of handouts. We're going to give you everything that you need to really dig in and not just understand tarot, but master this subject totally. And ultimately, that means that you're going to have at your command one of the most powerful tools in the world, not for fortune telling, though you can do that with tarot, but for becoming who you are, for unlocking your true will, for aligning with your true destiny. That's what tarot is really about. It's a steering system. It's a GPS. It's a way to align with who you are truly meant to be in this life. And you could have no better teacher than Lon on this subject. So just like with all the rest of the classes at Magick.me, we have a 100% money back guarantee on this one. We truly believe in our material that much, so you have no risk in taking it. Specifically, that means if you take the class and before watching your 4th unit, anytime within the first 30 days of investing in the course, if you decide it's not for you, that's fine. Just let us know. We'll refund 100% of your money. You're not going to want to do that because this course is phenomenal, but the course is live today. Now it is at tarot.magick.me, tarot.magick.me, tarot.magick.me. This course is completely 100% recorded and polished. It's ready to take now. You don't have to wait for a live date. The course is there. Everything is available for you. So go, check it out, sign up. Your future self is already thanking you. All right, I will see you in class. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for being on. Why don't you want to just tell us a bit about who you are and your new book?
Sure. My name is Reverend Wendy Van Allen. I am, I just wrote a book about, that was kind of in my head for a long time. I've been practicing nature spirituality, basically since the 80s. So, it has been kind of my passion. And I wanted to write a book that was going to incorporate like more than just one path of nature spirituality. So I myself am a priestess of both Wicca and also Lukumi, or as many people know it as Santeria. And I also practice spiritism, which is a form of spiritualism. And over my many years, I realized there's a lot of commonalities in different types of nature spiritualities. And I kind of wanted to look into that. So I interviewed people that also practice that I know, that I became, in the different communities that I work in, including I've been an employee and a graduate of One Spirit Learning Alliance, which is an interfaith, interspiritual seminary in New York. And I've also worked at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck. And I realized, there's a lot of things that we do that are unique, but also they're like universal. So that's really what the book is about. It's about how we can like kind of come together as a common type of spiritual practice, a spiritual community that has more in common than we have different. And a lot of times people don't realize that. We're pretty much in a point of human. One of my degrees is in anthropology. I have an undergraduate degree in anthropology, and I'm actually working on a master's degree in counseling right now. And so I've been very interested in the human dilemma for a long time. And I think we're at a crossroads, and I think a lot of people realize that. And the crossroads is really like if humanity doesn't wake up to what we're doing with the Western paradigm to the earth and to each other, we're just not going to make it. I mean, we're just not going to.
What are we doing with the Western paradigm to the earth and to each other?
I believe that we've come to a place where we're disconnected from nature, and being disconnected from nature, being in a kind of like paradigm that rewards domination, that rewards greed, that rewards people that, a type of pyramid structure where there's just a lot of people at the top. There are very few people at the top that control the many, and that exploits the resources of the earth for profit. And I think that these things have been kind of baked into the way we live our lives. And some people are really like kind of waking up to the fact that we have to do something different, because if we don't see the earth as its own value. And if we don't see ourselves as connected to the earth and not just lords over it or, stewards even in the best case scenario, we're really going to do some damage. And we really have to look at the earth from the way the indigenous people all over the planet have in the past and kind of get back to that, which is like, we are part of the earth. Like, we can't be without it. There is no planet B right now. So that's where it starts. It starts from kind of like examining why I believe that patriarchy has been very damaging to the planet. But where it goes to is more solution focused. And it's about, why nature spirituality can really help us, not just to heal ourselves, but to kind of, bring that awareness to healing the planet.
So what would some worked examples be of that maybe are going on right now?
Some examples of what?
Of Jason? Solutions.
Some solutions. Yeah, I was thinking about that before. So one of the primary things is the idea that, I think one that crosses over is the idea that we have to be in balance with the earth. We can't just keep exploiting that. If we don't keep ourselves in some kind of, check with how we use the planet, how we use our resources, how we relate to each other, how our economies are run, we're going to, get to a point where we can't sustain life anymore.
Well, that I understand. I mean, I think that everyone's on the same page about that. But I was asking specific examples of what you think, and I mean worked real-world examples of something that you're pointing to as a solution.
Well, I think once people start living in a way that they acknowledge nature, they kind of make a conscious decision to be in rhythm with the seasons, let's just say, living seasonally, eating local, buying locally, eating locally, learning how to buy their own foods and grow their own food. So
right. I understand, but I'm asking for specific examples. I'm
trying to tell you some specific examples.
Well, I mean, do we have names of programs, or can you point to specific groups that are doing things like this?
Yeah, I think there's a really great group that I talk about in my book a lot, Earth Spirit in Massachusetts.
Okay.
Earth Spirits is a group that is a nature-based group that is, you don't have to just practice one faith tradition. If you are nature-based, earth-based, you're welcome to the community. And they actually, were a group of pagans that were living in the Boston area, and they were meeting and doing their holidays and ceremonies. And they realized, if we really want to practice nature tradition, we need to get closer to nature. So a group of them got together and they bought land in Western Massachusetts, and they have over 100 acres, and they have ceremony. And for 40 years, they've been, a large community there that people come to the land and honor the land and work with each other. And then they take that mentality home to their spaces. So not everybody lives in the community, but many do. And then people that are part of the community take the values that they've learned there in the Earth Spirit communities home.
So what is it that they're doing there? Are they growing food, or is there some type of specific practice that they're doing there outside of spiritual practice?
They're doing practices related to nature spirituality.
So
the calendar of the seasons. And Jason, when I can tell you that I've been practicing for this for over 30 years, when you connect to the calendar of the year in a spiritual way, it kind of infuses everything you do.
Well, that's kind of what I'm getting at. I mean, because this is a podcast about spirituality, and we talk about this all the time, but I'm wondering how it's great to talk about values and belief systems, but I'm kind of fishing for how they actually ground that into the material world. Are they doing some type of sustainable farming? Is there some actual praxis outside of beliefs?
Yes, because that's what I'm trying to tell you, is that they have ceremonies that they do throughout the year, that people attend large gatherings. At the large gatherings, there are workshops that people talk about permaculture, sustainability, how to connect with your land, how to get involved with causes that protect the earth. So it's kind of a clearinghouse for people to come together and kind of find ways that they can bring their values into their life on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. And I believe that throughout the pagan community, and I've been to pagan gatherings for the last 30 years and beyond, there are people doing that kind of work. that are putting the care of the planet, the relationship to the planet and to nature front and foremost in their life, in their values. So another place that I think is really important, and I'll be appearing there to talk about my book, is at the Parliament of the World Religions. And are you familiar with that at all?
Remind me, and for the listeners as well.
Yes, the Parliament of the World Religions is a fantastic gathering of like-minded people from all different faiths, and they have it every 2 to 4 years around the world. They had it in 2018 in Toronto. In 2016, they had it in Salt Lake City, and this year in August, they'll be hosting it in Chicago. And basically, people who are interested in solutions for the planet and coming together as spiritual people from all different traditions come, and they have, very large gatherings of conversations, of art exhibits, of activists discussions, and, kind of interfaith discussions about what we can do to address the world's problems. And they talk about everything from racism, sexism, colonialism, how capitalism is exploiting the planet and what we can do about it, about just social justice. And also there's always a great contingent of people that come for nature from different nature paths. When I was there the last 2 times, I was very moved by all of the different indigenous people from around the world that came there. And there was 10,000 people in Toronto, and both in Toronto and Salt Lake City, there was very large gatherings of indigenous people from around the world that they came with one intention. And it was, if we don't do something now to confront climate change and to really begin to listen to what we've been trying to say, the planet is going to suffer, and so are we.
What were some of the most interesting ideas or solutions you heard proposed at this meeting? 10,000 people is a ton of people. What were some of the biggest takeaways you got from that in terms of practical solutions?
I think that was that was the biggest for me personally. For instance, I witnessed a ceremony that took place. They had a large teepee in Utah that was kind of the gathering place for all of the indigenous people. And they had a ceremony for the coming together of the grandmothers. And there was representatives from South America, from South Asia, from Europe, and from North America, from the different indigenous tribes from all of those places that kind of came together. And the whole purpose of it was this is the coming together of a prophecy that when all of the people come together, we can make a change to the world.
Whose prophecy was this?
The condor and the eagle prophecy. Are you familiar with that one?
No, what is that?
There's a prophecy in Native America, in South America, I believe, that says that when the time of the eagle meets the time of the condor is the time that humanity is going to evolve.
Is that from a specific tribe or time period, and/or?
It is, and I can't remember. I believe it's a Mesoamerican people. I'm not sure exactly off the top of my head, but I wrote about it on my blog if anybody wants to read it. It's on soulblossomcenter.com. And the prophecy basically says the eagle represents the northern way or the western way of logic and science and the way we've been going, individuality. And the condor represents the collective way, the more maternal way. And so what they were saying was that at this time period, we're coming together, the two different ways of being, both the Western and the Eastern, the Northern and the Southern. And at that gathering with so many people from different faiths, it really felt like it was a momentous occasion.
Okay. So your book is, the newest one, if I'm correct, is Relighting the Cauldron, right? And so one of the things that interested me the most about this is this kind of idea of having a conversation among nature-based practitioners or neo-pagans. And that's something that people have been trying to do for quite a while. And something that I've been involved in since the early 2000s, at least. And if there's a little bit of skepticism in my voice, it's largely because my own frustration, hearing people talking and doing ceremonies and talking about shared values and basically nothing coming out of it. And I'm not saying that that's what's going on here, but that's why I'm asking about specific solutions or actions, because I think one of the downfalls of neo-paganism as a whole is a lot of symbolic action and talk without grounding it in the material world. I'm sure you probably had similar experiences along those lines. So in terms of the book and going forward, I mean, so much has changed in the last 10 years. I mean, we have Extinction Rebellion in the UK. We've had the Dark Mountain Project. We have, Greta Thunberg has had a tremendous effect on the world. The peak oil narrative has fallen by the wayside. There's been a tremendous amount of money put into the resurgence of the right. And discrediting climate change even, unfortunately. So the people who are on the other side, shall we say, are extremely motivated, organized, well-funded, and quite active in the material world and are funded by oil companies. Which is why I'm so interested in practical solutions, because, people have been kind of kumbayaing since the 60s about this. And while it makes everyone feel good, and feel like they have a shared commitment, it's like, meanwhile, people are sitting in Shell Oil Company completely oblivious.
Oh, I agree with you. We can be as cynical as possible around this. I mean, I absolutely agree. There's a lot of people that don't really realize that there's a urgency to it, that it isn't just about doing ceremony and feeling good about yourself. Absolutely not. I think that committed pagans and committed people that practice other spiritual traditions that are grounded in nature realize that we have to take it to another level. And I would have to disagree with you. I mean, I've been in the pagan community for 30 years, actually more now. I see that there's people that are really doing the work. And I think people that are in the environmental activism, they come away with a nature-based spiritual outlook. So it's like one kind of feeds the other. Are there people that, don't even see the connection between the calling the elements and the fact that we have to take care of the planet? Yes, there are. And I talk about that a lot in my book. Some other forms of healing that I think are important to talk about too, in addition to just how vital it is that we have to connect our spiritual practices to this duty to make a difference, because you're right. The money is behind the people that have been, kind of sustaining this unsustainable way of life for a long time. It's got to be an uprising from the bottom. It has to be people taking action because they feel like it from their core, from their very core of their values. And that's what I talk about the cauldron. The cauldron represents that core, that internal guidance that we have. But one of the things that I work in is I work in mental health. And if you know anything about it, we are in a mental health crisis right now.
Sure are, yeah.
And a lot of people are, that's another thing that I believe the Western paradigm kind of took us to. And it wasn't because it was a horrible thing at first. In the beginning, the idea of individual rights is fantastic. People didn't have that, For the longest time, we were just the subjects of the feudal lords, So the rise of people's individual rights had a value. Democracy came out of that, all of that. But now we're at the point where people are so trained to be individual that people have lost that sense of collective, that sense of community. Yeah. And so what are we left with? We left with people with dying of deaths of desperation, addiction, mental illness. So I work in mental health now because I believe that's also, a calling that I personally have. There's ways that we can address it spiritually. I speak a lot about how in nature spirituality, one of the commonalities is ancestor worship or veneration. And through that practice, people can really work on healing ancestral patterns. Mental illness and dysfunction comes from ancestral patterns.
Let's talk about this. Is super interesting. I really want to dig in on this. So the first thing is, in terms of mental health, the first thing, and I definitely want to talk about the ancestral thing. That is very fascinating. In terms of mental health, have you seen, I'm not sure exactly what your clinical practice is, but have you seen a big difference I mean, this is basically a rhetorical question, but have you seen a big difference since COVID? And what is your sense of how people have been handled it at the time, and where people are now? Because this is something that comes up almost every episode on the podcast, because it's something everyone's going through.
Right.
So this, I'm really interested in.
I'll tell you that I went. I'm just completing my graduate studies now, so I've been interning for over a year, almost a year now, and I'm seeing the ramifications of what COVID has left. I absolutely agree that it increased people's alienation, it increased anxiety, depression. It increased polarization. Nobody knows what to believe. People aren't. It's just unfortunate, but I think it's all part of, once again, I think that COVID is actually part of nature kind of like responding to an overflow of humans. Nature's going to bring it back to a carrying capacity she can handle. Yeah. And, we're going to have more pandemics.
Yeah, it seems very likely. More pandemics.
But along with COVID is substance abuse. I mean, people are just... they're in search of something that gives them an inner feeling of satisfaction, a connection, and also where people are missing that ecstasy of life, and that's something that, once again, with nature spirituality, that is part of it. Most practices have some form of ecstatic union with the divine, whether it's going into some kind of a trance through drumming or singing or, serving the Orisha or, I've been to, like I said, to many pagan gatherings where people just do, group drumming and all. There's an ecstasy there that happens, that's available, that is experiential, that is necessary for the human psyche.
Right.
And we, so that's what I mean. Why I think that, mental health is something that is addressed when people practice these kinds of traditions.
Yeah, I think one of the things about ceremony like that is it's not just about connecting with nature, it's also about connecting with the people around you.
Exactly.
Their group experiences. And that's something that people miss often when they're just reading about this rather than doing experientially, is how intensely visceral and group oriented it can be, and very healing, because very transformative, particularly in a society that does everything it can to alienate and silo people into their digital worlds, which it is making people sick. It was making people sick before COVID. People are already socially isolated before COVID, walking around staring at their phones. So obviously addiction.
I think that too. I think the phone is one of the...
Yeah, the phone's awful. I hate phones. I think everything bad comes out of them.
It's so disconnected us.
I hate them.
So that's another good example. It's like, yes, the Western paradigm gave us technology. Yay, you and I can have this conversation. But now what's the downside? And how can we correct that? And what can we do to disconnect from the phone?
Get rid of phones. I like computers. I love technology. I just hate phones. Can we go back to the flip phones? Yeah. Some people are. I hate these things. I was thinking about it the other day, and it's just like, I was thinking it's like 90% of my stress over the last 5 years has come out of this black box.
Exactly.
It's just like, they're awful.
It's a toxic thing.
They really are. I mean, and they're bad for you too. And they track and monitor you everywhere you go. It's just all around. They're truly awful. So let's talk about the ancestral thing. And one thing that struck me immediately as you said that was, I think that so much of, it really does strike me that trauma is passed down generation to generation. I mean, an on the nose example, no pun intended, would be, an abusive cycle where, rolls from one generation to the next, and the fact, just the act of stopping that cycle can be such a profound, perhaps the most profound spiritual act of just saying, well, that cycle is going to end with me. And that clearly relates to ancestral work. So let's talk about that, and maybe if we talk about maybe practical things that people can do in those regards, because I know ancestral work is, big in Afro-Caribbean traditions, but it's not emphasized at all in the Western esoteric tradition, for instance, and people don't necessarily have...
I think people are coming
say more
around.
about that then. Say more.
Yeah, I do. I agree with you that in Afro-Caribbean traditions and indigenous traditions and even a lot of the Eastern traditions, it was always there, right? Ancestral tradition. but it wasn't originally there. Like, especially like even when I remember when I first, got into Wicca back in the 80s, like it wasn't there. But I think now today people realize the value of ancestral work.
What changed there? Why did that change?
Well, number one is, it was once again another casualty of the Western paradigm, because for the longest time people were told, if you pray for your dead, it's that's evil. You can invite spirits in, or you're crazy, one or the other. There's nothing there. There was like this cutoff from our ancestors where, if you go to a Latino, a cemetery in a Latino country, like if I go to Puerto Rico to visit my ancestors, right? There are, the cemeteries are a place of gathering. People have, most cemeteries, people still bring flowers. They still visit their ancestors. Whereas here, I was an archaeologist for about 10 years and I dug up cemeteries that people forgot. Wow. I helped move thousands of people from a project. Oh my God.
Tell this story. Tell this story, please. I want to. This sounds super.
Yeah, this is a great story. I worked on the Potter's Field project in Sea Caucus in the 1990s.
Oh boy! Yeah, and please tell people what a Potter's Field is for those who don't know.
Yes, a Potter's Field is a field that most people were buried in up until the early part of the 20th century, because most people didn't have money. There wasn't such things as caskets and funerals. Most working people, poor people, regular people were buried, very unsanctimoniously in a either a pine box or in a shroud. The poorest people were put in a Potter's Field, especially in places like New York and urban New Jersey, where
that's still there in New York, right? I think there's a Potter Field off of City Island in New York.
I believe you're right. Buried. Yeah, they put people from COVID there. A whole bunch of people.
Oh, really?
Yes,
that's
on
dark.
City
That's
Island.
very unfortunate. Yeah.
But they found a Potter's Field in Sea Caucus when they were putting in the hub for the trains. They were putting in a new hub, and all of a sudden the bulldozers, uncovered a bunch of bones, and they had to stop it because there's laws against disrupting the dead. And when they did an excavation, they realized, holy cow, this thing is huge. And they looked at the records. There were records there that went back till pretty much the mid 1800s up until the mid 20th century. So we're talking when I was born, the 20, in the 60s.
And they just lost the records of it? That's so recently.
They purposely lost the records.
Okay. All right. Well,
the weeds grew up.
Yeah.
Everybody forgot about those dead people. 5,000 people, Jason. And that's just an example of like we forget the dead because it's not something that's Westernly done. People don't, once grandma's dead and gone, it's people just don't do it.
Yeah, I would argue that sometimes we forget people before they die too in nursing homes.
Oh my God, that's so true. It's sad.
Yeah.
But so how does this tie into nature spirituality? Like I said, in Indigenous practices and in many other practices, it was always there. Why it's important is because when you forget who your ancestors are, you forget yourself. This is a know thyself thing. What is my culture? What does my culture teach me? What can I learn from my language? What can I learn? What good, bad, and different? Yes, some of my ancestors, they did, terrible things. Some of my ancestors, I have, European ancestors as well. Slavery, just genocide, things that were toxic. But many of these people were also really resilient. I learned resilience. We inherit things from our ancestors, whether we believe in it spiritually or not. Our tastes, our looks, our genes, our aptitudes, our skills. What can I learn about my ancestors to preserve, to teach me about myself, and where can we heal that, just like you were saying?
Yeah.
When there are patterns that are dysfunctional.
Yeah. Do you follow epigenetics at all?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's fascinating.
Interesting.
And now they know
way, huh?
that trauma that is passed down in cultures like in the African American culture it's really there. Yeah. Like it shows up in diseases. In among Jewish Americans because they have the legacy of the Holocaust.
Yeah, I think there was a study they did where it was like children of Holocaust survivors were basically had as much trauma going on as people who went through it. or almost as much. Which is why I kind of get really frustrated when people say things like, well, just get over it. That was the past. It's like, the past is not gone. The past is right here.
The past is not gone.
Yeah.
Great example. Like the people in Canada, right? That the native people in Canada, many different tribes, kept saying that up until the 60s, again, these poor kids were getting killed on these concentration camps or school. That was, and the church denied it. Church denied it. And now, today, it was literally this year, the church has apologized because those bones showed up again. The bones show up. The ancestors want to be honored. And that's exactly what happened at that Potter's Field. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people that were forgotten, Eastern European mostly, that, came up. I mean, it was pretty fascinating. And why it's important, when we honor them, when we remember them in a ceremonial way, we can actually make a connection with our dead. People that practice nature spirituality, we believe that there is a different, there is life after death in a different way. We don't see it the same as Christians, but we see it in a way that we can make connections that when we pray for them, they can help us. They're their closest relatives. Plus, by, like you said, making things conscious, we don't have to carry it into the future. And then it heals the future too. It heals the descendants.
Yeah, tangibly so.
Tangibly so. So that's all comes, and I have a client that I've worked with recently who she started working with her ancestors. Her ancestors are from Poland, and she's had this amazing transformation of, awareness that came to her, is like what things she can heal that she doesn't want to pass along to her grandchildren. Simply from lighting a candle, putting the pictures of her family, and going into a deep listening relationship with them when she's, honoring them.
That's really beautiful. I'm a believer in that as well. I mean, I think that, it's like this, there's a reason why we hear it's like, if you can cut someone off from their history, then they don't know who they are anymore. You can control them.
In Spanish, they say la lengua es la idioma. Oh. It means that the tongue carries the culture. The language. So think about
think about people who have their language taken. They have to learn English.
In a way, right? Yeah. Right now, there's a resurgence in Ireland for people to learn Irish, to speak. Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. The young people are teaching the old people.
Yeah, I've had someone on the podcast who's involved in that, Frankie Gaffney, in preserving that language.
They're saving the language, yeah. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with one of the people that I interview for my book from New Zealand, a Maori Pue Ormsby. She was very much involved in the resurrection and the reclamation of the Maori language, the Maori culture, bringing it back and basically sharing it with everyone. And it's a really great story. I think if you get a chance to read about that in my book, you would really enjoy that. But reclaiming the culture through the ancestral lines, Yeah,
I'm a big believer in it. And also, I'm a believer in magic. And I think that, and a practitioner. So I think that, doing things that seem that deceptively simple. I mean, like I did something where I started working with runes, and then the next day I looked at my 23andMe results, and it turned out to be related, descended from a tribe of rune worshipping, Odin worshipping, snake worshipping, the Longbards in Europe. So it was just like an immediate payoff. And I think that, you said earlier that people have the sense that, if you talk to the ancestors or if you talk to your dead, there's something wrong with you, it's evil spirits. It's like, well, this is how people feel about magic in general. We know that's wrong. So, but I think it's the opposite. I think that probably people from other cultures look at us as like there's something fundamentally wrong with us because we don't. And fundamentally, I think it is like it's a serious problem and it's a serious spiritual problem to be cut off from your past and your ancestors. And, Christianity gets a lot of flack, but I think deservedly so in this case, because it puts so much effort into colonization and cutting people off from their roots in Europe and in North America. People always remember North America, but they forget that Christianity also colonized Europe.
Exactly.
And Australia and the rest of the world. So in parts of Asia. So, and
it was the same template. It was the same template that cutting off of people from their language, from their culture, from their religion, teaching them that it's evil. So they internalize it and it becomes a prison of their mind. Colonialism is incredibly toxic.
Yeah, and then they give people the great story that they're going to an eternal torture chamber for all time if they don't do what they're told, which is talk about trauma. That's a global trauma.
Right.
The people have
it's a
really
global
not
trauma
addressed.
that's brainwashed from the youngest age, and that when you wake up from that trance, as Rainey Eisler says it so well, the trance of domination. It's amazing what you see. You're like, wow, I believed all this. It was all so fear-based and terrifying. And yeah, it's a prison of the mind.
Yeah, there was when I went through this kind of Northern tradition thing, I was learning more about the history of the Germanic tribes. And there's a really brutal story from that time period of Charlemagne and the Franks came in and Christianized all of the German pagans, but at that time they were tree worshippers and they worshipped a tree referred to as the Irminsul, and they basically gathered everyone around and watched them as they forced them to watch as they cut the tree down. It was the center of their entire religion. So you don't get that much more potent of a demonstration or symbol of what that process is. And I think that the beauty of whatever you want to call it, neo-paganism or the revival of ancient traditions is that people are trying to reconnect, even because we also know that there's no such thing as perfect reconstruction. It's all neo-paganism, but I feel like it doesn't matter because the people who were doing it were making it up as they went along anyways at the time. I think as long as you're sincere, the point is that you're making a connection.
I do too. And you when you said that about the tree, it just gave me such chills because it was such a perfect symbol of this is them and this is their connection to nature. The tree and them were one. That's why they were the sacred groves. Like when you read the Bible, you hear that, they were ordered, these people, the patriarchal people were ordered to cut down the groves of the goddess and those groves.
What's that story?
It's, I don't know my Bible perfectly, but there is exactly. There is a passage in the Old Testament about the sacred groves and that they were to cut them down. And that's
well, they still do that, in Israel.
And
they're constantly cutting down the olive trees of the Palestinians. Yeah. But specifically in Palestine, they go down and cut everyone's olive trees down.
Wow.
As part of the colonization.
The colonization is definitely one of the things that I think that, and I speak about that in my book, that we have to recognize and basically, understand that there's victims all over. As you said, the template that destroyed the cultures of North America and South America was the same template that was used in Europe on their own people. As you said, the Germanic people had a beautiful tradition. Now, today's neo-pagans, today's people that are practicing, there's a lot of things that are left behind that don't need to be brought forward, like human sacrifice and those kind of things, obviously.
Right.
But, when you think about, the Christian tradition, the whole central fascination is a human sacrifice, right? Yeah. It's like we drink the body and the blood of our God. So it's like they sublimated it and then...
Well, yes. In that case, it's yes and no, because the whole point of the crucifixion is that it ends animal and human sacrifice. That it's the final sacrifice. So I've heard that argument made many times, particularly from Afro-Caribbean traditions, and it's like I kind of like yes and no, because that actually ended animal sacrifice within that tradition. But I think going back to the point of modern paganism, I think the sign of a living, breathing, and healthy tradition is that it's living, it reinvents itself, it is creative. People are making it up, so people get hung up on this authenticity thing. And it's
I think people do get hung up on the authenticity. I see that in the Lukumi tradition as well. It's like this purity thing that granted, and I'm very clear in my book that especially the Afro-Caribbean traditions, the Orisha-based traditions, these are living traditions.
Yeah,
people, they want to be part of it. First of all, they should initiate properly. They should find a community. They should find godparents. They should listen to their godparents, and they should also make sure to honor the path that they've chosen in the way that it exists. And I think that's true for all of the indigenous living traditions. We need to at least acknowledge where they come from and don't come in with this idea, well, I like this, but I don't like this.
Yeah, you can't make it up out of a book. Yeah.
But as you said, with neo-paganism, that's one of its gifts, is that it is a reconstruction. It's okay to say it's a reconstruction. Nowadays, I've been practicing Wicca since the 80s, but I know that, the reality of it isn't the oldest tradition in the world. No, we have created this because it fits that need for people and we can have creativity with it, and it's a good thing. And I know it works. I know that for me, that it is a very living and important tradition in my life.
Yeah, and I'm a real believer that just because, I feel that tradition can be rediscovered by reinventing it, and maybe you think that you're making it up, but really you're rediscovering. And also I'm a big believer that, the outer forms may be different, but you may be tapping into the same kind of field intelligence or experience or energy.
Or collective unconscious, if you follow Jung, because that's one thing I've been studying a lot of. Like, we are tapping into this collective unconscious knowledge that's there, that's part of all humans' heritage.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that. And I think certainly, people who are into psychedelics can have very intense experiences in that regard. So I think that I don't get hung up on the in fact, I can be quite irritated sometimes by when it gets over academicized, because because what you're saying, it's like people disconnect from the fact that, magic and paganism are not complicated. They're simple. Yeah. They're visceral. Literally just get together with a bunch of people and work it out, and people can get into head trips, which I don't think is very productive. But
there are people that enjoy that are very into, reading the sagas and being very to the letter. And
that stuff's great, but yeah.
And it's really cool, but I agree with you that that's not where we're going to get the juice and the passion and that which is going to help transform ourselves and transform the planet. It comes more from the experience of that ecstatic union that I began with. Yeah,
I wanted to go back a little bit and ask you, because you mentioned becoming involved in Wicca in the 80s, definitely the me era. And I wanted to ask you how you've seen Wicca as a tradition change, or Wicca as a group of traditions, I should say, change from then until now, and kind of like cycles of coming to consciousness it may have gone through, or problems it may have gone through.
Thank you. That's a great question. I have seen it transform a lot. I'm kind of taken today by how so many in the neo-pagan community, especially a lot of people that call themselves witch, hate Wiccans. It's like this.
Really? Like, that's a thing?
Like, it is. There's this whole thing about they're too fruffy, flu, and, or the Wiccan read is nonsense. And I can't get over it. Like, I'm like, wow, how did that happen? It's too mainstream, I guess. I don't know. But
I just laugh. Like new people who are like new Instagram witches, or
a lot of TikTok witches, Instagram witches. Okay. Like there's a movement towards witchcraft with a little w. I want to say that's the craft that's maybe in something that's practiced that's more ceremonial, or maybe more geared to getting what I want. It's stuff like that. So I'm kind of taken by that, and I'm not sure what to make of it yet. I just find it's interesting. But yes, when I began, I was, I went to college at NYU for my first 2 years, and I discovered the magical child and enchantments. And
did you meet Herman's later?
I did.
Horrible Herman.
Yeah, I remember.
You have any good horrible Herman stories?
I wasn't that in the inner circle, but I just enjoyed that store so much, Jason. It was so amazing to go to that store at that time in the 80s. It's like, when I went to NYU, that was during the AIDS crisis. So it was the whole, the Greenwich Village was completely different then, but it was a very vibrant place. And it was, a lot of activism, a lot of energy there. So, yes, that's where I discovered Wicca. At that time, it was, subversive, and it was a rebellion again. To me, I found what I had been looking for my whole life. I grew up as an Episcopalian, and at the time, the Episcopal Church was still very patriarchal. Women were not to be priests, and I always had that calling that I felt very connected to it. But then I learned about like the witch burning times. I learned about what the religion did. I learned about colonialism in college, and I was like so turned off by it. And when I discovered Wicca and this focus on the goddess, it was very much at the focus on the goddess and like this, inner feminine, the divine feminine, that it was so healing to me as a woman, very much, at that time, the British traditions, the Gardnerians, the Alexandrians at that time, that was, in the nude, everybody was nude. I was in my 20s, I could be nude. I didn't mind it so much as I do now, yeah, it was, but that's when I started going to pagan gatherings in my early 20s. And that's when I really discovered like this, like you said, that joy, that ecstasy, this, oh my God, all these people are coming together, this freeing feeling, I'm freeing your mind, freeing your body, freeing, there was a lot of, sexual freedom that wasn't experienced, especially, in our mainstream culture. And, it was very healing to me, but over time, I kind of got turned off by witch wars. People like always talking about, love and light and all this peace. But meanwhile, they'd like, want to put whammies on each other. Right?
Yeah.
And I also got turned off by people that like did it more as a LARP versus like actually believed in this stuff. I was like, I'm a believer. Like if anything, I do believe. I believe in magic. I believe in ancient deities. I believe in God, goddess, spirit. I'm a believer, And then I went through a period of my life where I was, a dark night of the soul, I would call it. And I really had to re-examine, what I was doing. I basically got sober. I'm just going to say it. I got sober in about almost 20 years ago now. And I kind of looked at everything. Thank you. And I kind of looked at everything that I was doing and decided, well, maybe I need to make peace with Jesus. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe that was not right for me. So I went back to church for a little while, but I realized I don't believe in any of this stuff anymore, but I do like, and I started looking at more of the Santeria tradition. And I was like, this, being on my mother's side, I'm Puerto Rican, it's Latino, it's like, there's something to it that I wanted to really explore. And that's when I started that path. And, over the time that I've been in both communities, I've realized that there's going to be people that do that LARPing or using it for power or ego purposes in both of those places, and I think that that's just the nature of spirituality. It can be misused for the wrong reasons. Today, I see a lot more, like I said, people that, in Wicca, I think that it's expanded. I mean, people have traditions from all different ethnicities. You have Irish Wicca, you have British Wicca, you have Italian Strega. There's so many different paths that people can follow, and I think it's wonderful. And I do think it's cool that there's different kinds of witchcrafts. I don't understand the need to begin these kind of battles in communities that should. And my whole book is about like, let's get over these things. Let's make peace work. It's like, and it does sound naive, and I realize that, Jason. That
it doesn't sound naive. I think we've had very similar experiences. I mean, certainly everything you're saying is the same thing that I experienced in the occult and magical community and the 90s and 2000s, and kind of similar passage through it. And yeah, the witch wars is some of which I participated in. So,
did you?
Yeah.
I see it on TikTok now. I see them going at each other.
This is a long time ago. It was a long time ago. I think it's part of it, though. I mean, it seems to be, it's like when you have spiritual paths that largely are about the individual and individual power, of course, people are going to butt heads.
It has that two-edged sword. It empowers people. These are empowering, self-empowering traditions, because you're taking the power out of the hands of a select few and you're claiming it for yourself, which I think is wonderful. But you're right, with people that have unbalanced or unchecked egos, that's what they do. It becomes this, reason to inflate yourself and then get involved in these, this destruction, self-destruction and community destruction.
I think it's a growing stage, though. I mean, I think people go through it, and you kind of have to go through it to mature out of it. I don't think you quite get to skip it. Hopefully you're not too destructive when you go through that. But, and I think that people kind of grinding on each other like that sometimes has positive benefits, just because people are they're coming to power and then they're finding their strength And it's still a group activity they're engaging in. So
yeah, that's a good point. I like that.
I mean, I didn't feel like that. I thought it was awful at the time, but now I have a bit wider of a perspective on it. I think it made me a stronger person. But you know, in the 80s and 90s, there was such an emphasis, I think, in the New Age and occult community on the Christian right being the enemy, because they were. It was the satanic panic and moral majority and all of that. And now that's kind of one of the things I'm curious about. I guess one thing I'm curious about is there as much of an emphasis on the kind of freedom that you were talking about now? I mean, I feel like people are a lot more puritanical now than they were perhaps at that time.
Which people?
Counterculture people in general, but occult people. You know, I think there was much more of, I mean, it was wild.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like that now.
I think I see where you're going, and I think I tend to agree. I just think that is a unfortunate part of our culture in general, is this puritanical, that I hate to say it, but everything has to be correct, and if you say the wrong thing, or you know, you're going to be, you know, over worried about, like, appropriating something that isn't yours, or it has to only be this way. And the truth of the matter is 99%, like so many of us, are more than one culture. We come from more than one place, you know, and we can do this in an intentional way by being respectful. I think the number one thing is, like, I mean,
I know that drives me crazy. It's like what we're not supposed to learn from other cultures.
Exactly.
Like,
why? When did that happen? Exactly. Yeah. And many of those cultures, if people weren't willing to learn them, it would have died. You know, I've you know, again, at the Parliament of World Religions, I had heard from a few of the different Indigenous speakers, like one from from Australia, that was talking about he couldn't find any Aboriginal people from his community to teach. So he found a Westerner who was interested in. Now, does that make the person, you know, not right because he didn't have the blood? No, he was willing to learn. And I think that's really important. I think
that's true for a lot of traditions, too. It's like they're going to die, and the only people that are interested are, you know, Western neo-pagans, and they're just going to die otherwise. Because, you know, it's like you go to... It's like, you know, it's like when I went to India and Nepal, it's like I'm so totally interested in their stuff. And they just, you know, all the young kids are just like, yeah, we just want motorcycles and Big Macs, you know. So, and I feel that particularly American people, by and large, are so sweet and open, particularly spiritual people. And so, yeah, it's a tough culture right now because people are self-censoring, which is the worst type of censorship. And that's kind of why I was asking.
It's a fear-based thing that's happening, and you're right. It's not helpful. I don't think it is either. And I think that, you know, we really need to. It's all shadow material from the whole the toxicity of colonialism and from racism. It's okay. Now we know about this, so now I'm afraid to do anything, and I'm going to call you out on it. I'm gonna condemn and shame you instead of with it myself.
Talk about that. That's really interesting. I mean, it's kind of like, it's like the same dominator impulse, but now it's in reverse somehow. But it's really the same thing.
It's the same thing. It's just more scapegoating and more, you know, it's basically shame based. It's shame based. It's let's just shame everyone, and, you know, and then no one can have anything because, you know, we're going to police everything that's out there. And that is if there's anything that's completely, like, you know, it's like a mind virus that has to be changed. I think we need to get back to how can we learn from each other? How can we share? How can we, because ideally the paradigm is we're humans. We're one humanity that we can learn from each other. I always love the idea, like, you know, one of the things that we have in our Western culture, especially in America, is that melting pot. what I grew up with, the melting pot, right, Jason? Like, oh, like my mom was told, don't teach them Spanish because it'll confuse them. Whereas I'm mad at her for years that my Spanish is not that good because she was told, you're here in the United States, you have to learn need to learn American. I know so many people who were second generation, they had to learn English, right? Mm-hmm. Forget your culture, forget who you are, forget where you came from, forget everything. That's the melting pot. Become American, right? Well, what is it? What are we left with? We're left with a pretty toxic culture. Whereas the more healthy idea is, everybody remembers and honors their culture and shares it.
Yeah.
What can I share?
A potluck.
Like if you, exactly. Like a salad or a potluck, like if you go to like some of these more ethnic communities in urban areas, that's the way it is. There's a community barbecue and everybody's bringing what they bring, and that's great. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I've always found
that's the mentality I think we need more.
I agree with you. I always found whenever I go to, of course I can't read people's minds, so I don't know what they're thinking, but on balance, when I go to communities like that of other cultures, because I'm legitimately interested in their traditions and their practices, mm-hmm. I've never been met with anything except welcoming, because they're excited that someone's interested in what they're doing. It's like, oh, you like what we're doing? You like us? It's like, yeah, exactly. I do. And so, yeah, it's one of my friends made a joke. This was maybe 10 years ago now, but we were discussing how ironic it is that it's like, it's so often now it's like witches doing the witch hunting. And she was like, oh yeah, she said something like, yeah, all these supposed witches that are out canceling people are, they're all reincarnated inquisitors that are trying to work out their karma. They were reincarnated as witches after burning them. I was like, I'll believe that. Pretty funny.
That's so interesting. Yeah. And that's what's going on. And it's just like, they're shutting down what should be blooming and blossoming and sharing, that's why I love that event, the Parliament of World Religions, and I think you should go because I think you'd like that. Like I loved that.
Is that the same one that Vivekananda presented at in the 19th century? Like, has it been, or is this a different? It
began in the 19th century.
Yeah,
yes,
I think, yeah,
did. Yeah. And they didn't have it for a long time, but they brought it back, and it was just beautiful that way. It was like all these different traditions, and there's open-minded, people from all faiths: Christian, Muslim, Buddhist. There were one of the most beautiful things was like the Sikh people. They have something called langar, and what langar is they feed everybody. You come in, you get your head wrapped, and you sit on the floor to be all equal, and they give you a dish of some delicious like lentils and their cuisine, and it's so beautiful.
Food is so wonderful to bring people together and also share cultural values. You can't cancel food.
We pagans feast. That's one thing that I love. When we have a feast, we feast.
That's great.
Somebody said that to me once. Like, do you have fasts? I'm like, well, you could do a personal fast for like if you're going on like some kind of journey or something. But really, like, no, it's the opposite. We feast.
Yeah, I feel that paganism is about enjoying life as it is.
Yeah, and even in my other tradition, in Afro-Caribbean tradition, like one of the misunderstood things is the matanza when you are butcher the animals in a ceremonial way for somebody making ocha, which is the main ceremony. What people don't realize is there's like priests in that room that they're butchers. They're chopping everything up. They're sending it up to the kitchen to be served. So like the blood will feed the orishas, and the orishas are born in blood just like us, but the food becomes part of the communal tradition.
Yeah, that one in particular is something that I feel people are pretty hypocritical about. I mean, it's like people get up in arms about, animal sacrifice, but then it's like it's done respectfully, it's eaten. Then you go to the store, and like every time I go to the supermarket, I just see walls of meat that is going to get thrown out.
Right.
Because
it's going to get thrown out.
It comes from factory
Somebody's
farms.
Somebody's got to make money too.
They want to have the illusion that there's abundance, and then they just waste all these, they torture and then waste these lives. It's like, that's the true sickness. But, it's like, I think anyone who's been a pagan or a witch or an occultist has a pretty keen sense of shadow projection because people project all their shit on you,
So true.
Yeah. Which is why we shouldn't, I always love anything that brings people together because, I think that people do reenact that trauma by demonizing each other in the community, which is very unfortunate.
It is unfortunate. And it's really like that's why we need to do our mental health work, our spiritual health work, our physical health work. We have to do it first on ourselves. We have to begin with being willing to face the shadow and to embrace it, to realize what's in my shadow. Like I had a hard time when I was in ceremony kind of understanding what shadow was. I was like, oh, I want to get this. I know this is important. And one of the teachers said to me, I was like, okay, so racism is shadow material, right? What is the opposite of it? Because if you want to learn what it is the shadow of, you have to look at it. And the opposite is exactly what we've been talking about all day, which is honoring your culture, being proud of your culture, right? Is this pride in your culture and who you are and everything. And the shadow of it is racism. And it's just like, that's what got me. I was like, okay, now I can understand. And I have one too. All of us do. We all have a shadow side. So we have to do our work now.
Talk about this more. I mean, I think because shadow work is something that people pay lip service to. You see memes about it on social media all the time. And it's one of these things, particularly like with a lot of Jung's concepts, that you hear people talking about a lot, but maybe they don't fully understand and certainly don't have a sense of, like people throw out the phrase shadow work, but I don't think necessarily have a sense of what that really means or how to go about it or what the goals are there. So talk about this, please. I think it's something that people are all interested in.
It's something that I'm constantly open to learning more about. I actually just took a workshop recently on shadow and light, on what the shadow can teach us and what we can learn and gain from it. And I want to say that one of the most important things for us to realize is from the shadow comes all new birth, right? Like in the darkness is where the seeds are planted. So going into that darkness is rich and it's got a lot of power, right? So people fear the shadow. Like you said, people will demonize others. They will otherize people. They will project all this stuff on them. And what happens is they gain this power, these people that are otherified, which is why the people that are doing it feel the need to then begin genocides, holocausts, all these horrible things happen when we do that to others. But when people want to do the shadow work is like a very simple practice is what irritates me? What gets me activated when I feel overly emotional or something or incredible? And it could be emotional in a negative way or a positive way.
Okay.
It could be something that really activates me emotionally that I feel either fascinates me or repels me to a point that it's visceral. That's shadow material. That's what I need to look at and what I need to own my part of.
It sounds like what you're saying there is maybe and please correct me if I'm mishearing you, but it suggests to me that when you say shadow, you don't necessarily mean like quote unquote dark side. It's more just like what you have like projected outside of yourself and believe is not you. It's like what you cut yourself off from.
It is that,
okay.
But it's also what we're unconscious of.
Okay.
So it could be good or bad or indifferent. It's actually, no, it wouldn't be indifferent because shadow material is potent. So it could be both. And that's another thing that people don't understand is shadow can be something that we see in others that we won't allow to be expressed in ourselves. Like if let me think of a good example. Somebody that's always been taught to put others first, to put themselves last, to be, quiet, to shut down their desires, to shut down who they are, especially like, when it comes to expressing themselves, let's even say sexually, like somebody who's like really out. When they see that in somebody that they have shut that down, they've been taught to completely smush that down into the shadow. When they see somebody doing the opposite, being very, putting themselves on a pedestal and being really fabulous, right? That person will absolutely like make their shadow go off. That will cause them to have this reaction to them, like what we're seeing right now with the trans community. They're being otherized. They are absolutely that shadow material right now going on. Does that make sense, Jason?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's like the shadow is so pervasive and tricky that I feel like we could just keep talking about this issue. Just because it's so slippery. One thing, it's interesting too, because I mean, like, I feel like people, on balance, not everyone, particularly in like Santeria and things like this is not the case, but on balance, I think people in neo-pagan traditions are pretty liberal. And so there's a real tendency to, well, the Republicans are the enemy, things like that. And that's understood. But then you get people who are like, portray themselves as like, quote unquote, light workers. And they're otherizing other people in the community. Exactly. It's like, oh, you're tapping in. It's like the Star Wars mentality. You're tapping into dark forces. Yes. And it gets very comic booky. But,
and that's going back to the idea of like what a lot of Wiccans are getting attacked for is they're too light workers now. So it's like people are like, oh, you're not dealing with the dark. And it's like, so maybe that's true for some people.
Wait, say, what do you mean by that? What
you just described, that people are only love and light. Everything's, let's just focus on that. Don't, the spiritual bypass, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you don't think that because you're only giving it energy. It's like,
yeah,
no, I have to.
That. I hate that.
Yeah.
For me, like, paganism, just as a broad category, I feel is actually a great way through that. I mean, if you just think of paganism, as I do, as the study and worship of nature, or I don't even know if worship is a good word, but yeah, I mean the need to more and more understand nature, and that doesn't necessarily just mean like the asparagus plants out back. It means this thing that we're in, just like understanding it. Yeah, and
field, yeah,
exactly. And if you want to be like hermetic about it, it's like, well, you could say if this is the mind of God, then to understand it more and more is to become closer to that, and it includes everything, including horribly dark and destructive and awful things. And so it's like I think that approaching it from a truly pagan viewpoint of just trying to understand what it is, just being curious, like, what is this thing that I'm in, rather than falling into the light dark trap, has always been a very healthy way through that for me. You don't see that stuff in nature,
And that's what I also see in nature traditions is an embrace of both light, dark, and everything in between. It's understanding that, first of all, we're not the center of the universe. Like a great example is like a hurricane, right? The hurricane can be horrible for humans in the right way. It'll destroy everything. It'll, but what does it do? It like changes everything. It will, it could bring in something really needed, like getting rid of things that were there, like. Even a pandemic. I mean, the pandemic is a horrible thing because a lot of humans die. But really, this sounds kind of cold, but in a way, it's we need to come back to a point where there's not so many of us. We've kind of become a weed species, So nature's going to bring it back in balance, and she has a light side and she has a dark side,
Yeah.
So I think that pagans get that, and I think nature people get that.
I think that argument is what people, not just pagans, but I think people on the left in general get attacked a lot on by the Christian right. I mean, you even hear everyone's favorite Jordan Peterson going on and on about how, they hate humanity. They want everyone to die. These tree huggers, and it's just this bizarre disconnection. He's a grim-faced church-going son of a bitch, but that is so obvious. That's just how nature works, and obviously we're going to have tons more pandemics. Nature works,
and everybody's going to die. It's facing things very clearly. Whereas, I don't know. To me, to come, especially from that particular, tradition, their entire fantasy is based on everybody's going to die, and we're going to get to watch it from our, they're in the lake of fire, and I get to enjoy it because I'm. Yeah. It's horrible, and they actually want the end times. They want the world to be consumed in this horrible cataclysm. Like, don't talk to me about like we're basically just saying that nature has, we have to get back into a balance where we're not, overcoming the resources of the planet. Like cancer's part of our body when it comes, but what happens is it destroys the host. Like, are we going to be a cancer or are we going to be an immune cell? What are we going to do here?
Right. Well, I mean, or you just look at nature and it's like every species has a predator. or it overruns the environment. And then like deer, for instance, when they don't have a predator, they overrun the environment and then all die of chronic wasting disease, which is probably horrible. And so,
because it's out of balance. And that's the thing. And I really, that is the one question that I asked every practitioner that I spoke to is, talk to me about balance in your tradition. What does it mean and how does it look? Because balance is really, it isn't like, that is a big paradigm shift away from the Western tradition, which is going to the light, right?
Right.
In the nature tradition is bringing it into balance, bringing things back into balance.
Yeah, and I think that's what it's all about. I mean, I even got to the point somewhat recently where I started thinking about, it's like if you look at the European paganism, Indigenous, but even some of the Eastern traditions, Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and they're pretty similar. I mean, like European paganism is very similar to Hinduism. And I almost began thinking of those as a single ideological group. And then on the other hand, you have kind of the monotheistic religions, of which I include scientism, I include communism, atheism. They're all kind of a piece. And they're just they're just not even from the same universe, in terms of belief systems, where one is just totally immanent and in touch with things as they are and seeking to be in balance with things as they are and the patterns of life as they are and always have been, including going back to ancestors. And then on the other hand, you've got this. Then on the other hand, you've got this just, pull up, nuke it from orbit. We're all going to transcend and judge everyone from the country club in the sky thing they've got going. It's just
no leak of fire.
Yeah. It's just like there comes a time where you have to be just like, this is silly. And, how much, maybe we shouldn't be tolerant, perhaps, of this type of thinking. And I know that's controversial, but, the stakes are pretty high.
But I think we're moving away from it. I have to say, Jason, that, some people I've spoken to, I've done a few podcasts now, and I'm grateful to be on yours, that you can really, as we began, we could get real cynical and like, maybe people are better off dying. Like, I mean, it's just like the human race is like a dead end.
I don't feel that way at all.
No, but some people do, and I don't feel that way either. I have hope. I began my book with that point, like you made, about Greta Thunberg and how the youth are fired up. They're making change. They're like done. They're like forget about the boomers. Forget about you old people. Like, let's do something now. Like there is change happening, and I believe that people are waking up, but it's a different kind of awakening than what was sold in those traditions that you're talking about. It's an awakening to what is and what our role is and what we can do about it.
I think there really is a role for maybe even a new expression of the pagan tradition, because people do need obviously you don't want to go too far with it, but people do need, belief systems do bring people together and allow people to function very well. I do think that I agree about Greta Thunberg, although I think I get a little bit wary sometimes when people get generational about it, because it's like the reality is it needs everyone from every generation working on it. And so it's kind of like young people will be like, oh, well, we don't want boomers involved in this. And then consequently you have boomers saying it's like, well, the children are the future and they will fix everything. It's like kind of shuffling it off. So it requires everyone. I think that, generational thinking is kind of honestly a bit of a toxic hangover from the 50s and 60s. And 70s and 80s, and it's been perpetuated ever since. And the idea that different generations have different movements and zeitgeist, it's like, I don't think people have the luxury of thinking like that anymore, because the reality and the grand scheme of it is like the people who actually care are minuscule compared to the rest of the world. So it's just like the pagan community, where people will find small differences between each other. And I think that, if there's one theme coming out of this conversation, it's, there are so many of these, as you say, mind viruses or things that are encouraging people to make separations between each other, when really it should be the other way. People should be finding ways to come together. And
Oh, I
ceremony is
agree
a
with
great
you.
way
And
to do
I
it.
think, it's really important to acknowledge that. Thank you, boomers, for creating
Yeah.
Earth Day, for beginning it
Yeah.
off,
You wouldn't be
like,
anywhere otherwise.
yeah,
Like,
like I'm a Generation X person. So like our generation is kind of an interesting one. We're like, bridging the young and the old right now. But I agree with you. I think it's really important not to separate. And I think that you're absolutely right when you say that these are mind viruses, and we all have to be conscious. What separates us? What separates us? What separates us? And that separation can keep us from making the change we have to do. And there are good people. That's why I keep saying the Parliament, because I was so touched by people from all walks of life that go there, that like want to be part of the change. They want to do something different. They come and they share, and it's not a place where you're going to find my way is the right way people. You're going to find, what can I learn from you? How can we come together? What can we do for this problem or that problem on the planet? And how can we do it together? And they can do it from all different kinds of avenues, whether it's activism or, sustainability, permaculture, or art, or, there's so many different venues that people are using to, technology that are using to make these changes. And we need that right now. Like we've run out of time, man. We really have. We can't.
Yeah, it's
keep
too
pushing
late.
it off.
Yeah, it's too late to be playing silly games.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like I feel like particularly during COVID, I started to see things more clearly in this regard, where it's like, these mind viruses, these things that keep us separate, really is pretty simple. I mean, the thing that keeps us separate is being separate. Like, I don't know about you, but I noticed that when I'm on my own is when all these mind viruses and patterns can thrive, and I can start thinking like, oh, so-and-so said this, or like that type of thing. But as soon as you get around other people, that all kind of goes away, right? It's like, hopefully,
100%. Yeah, that's
it's like the devil thrives in isolation.
right. When we don't know who the other people are, it's easy to demonize them. But once you get to know your neighbors, once you get to know the people that are next door to you, you can find those commonalities. You could find what brings us together. I agree with you completely.
Yeah, and I mean, even maybe on a deeper level, where it's like, all those mental patterns start to go quiet. Those internal patterns of
right.
whatever story it's like I noticed, man, when I'm by myself, I tell myself some stories, and it's like, I think I'm thinking through and figuring things out. It's like, no, you're just making all this up. And it's like, you can be there sitting by yourself. I'm sure lots of people experience this during COVID, telling yourself these grand epic stories about so-and-so did this and that to you, and then this happened, and this might happen, and this is going to happen, and none of it's real.
Right.
And you cast all these parts.
Are so-and-so, that are.
Yeah.
You're so spiritual. In one of the traditions I practice, that's a really important teaching. It's like, going to the mountaintop and living in the woods is not that enlightening as much as, why? Because where you really evolve is in relationship with others. So the work of humanity is where we're really going to, evolve.
Yeah, and this is something that I think the neo-pagan traditions and Wicca have always been very, very clear and really good on, where things like, ceremonial magic, occult, golden dawn, chaos magic, not so much sometimes, but, like in ceremonial magic or hermeticism or whatever you want to call it, we have the whole idea of crossing the abyss, where you kind of have to, you go on your isolated quest and have to overcome reality by yourself. And it's like, well, the abyss, I think, is just being on your own and isolated, and crossing it probably means coming back to everyone else.
Coming back.
But coming back, initiate, it's like the old shaman's quest. But I think
initiatory experiences are really important too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think we need that. People crave that.
Absolutely. And it's not just they crave it, they need it. Particularly young people who don't get a sense of when they're an adult and when they're a child. So they are adult children into their 30s sometimes,
Right. That's why coming of age ceremonies were all part of, ancient traditions. It's really important. I agree with you.
Yeah. And they're not just coming of age, but death. It's like marriage. It's like childbirth, tragedy. Right. It's like these things were all. It's so crazy to think about, because it's like, you study these things in books, and it's like, oh, these ancient cultures like had this understanding and they did it with ritual. And it's like, and now that as I'm saying it, I'm thinking it's not as much that they celebrated it, it's that they experienced it together as a group, and if there was some type of ceremony, it was just a recognition of that, or a structuring of that outer. But it's like, if you're
something happens in the brain when we do that, when we ceremonialize.
Yeah. It makes it real. It structuralizes it. It's healthy. I mean, I'm a huge fan. It helps
people through it too, especially like with grieving and things like that. Absolutely.
Yeah. But I'm just imagining it's like, it's when you're coming of age, or when these hard, because everyone has hard passages in their life. But if the community is there with you, I mean, that's the difference. That's everything.
Exactly.
And people don't have that anymore.
Yeah, no, we don't. And that's why we have so many quote unquote throwaway people. We have these, like, getting back to like mental illness, people have these, they may be experiencing something that's come through. It could be that they actually are, have mediumistic gifts. But in our culture, it turns into like psychosis, and, they're immediately, giving a diagnosis. Now, imagine if you took that same person and you put them in a community that, as you said, listens to them, honors them. Maybe somebody who's been through it can help them to ground it. They would have a whole different experience.
Yeah.
It's really important that we see how in so many ways that our culture is leaving people behind.
Yeah, it really is, in fundamental ways. And this is one of the reasons I like podcasting so much, because it's not exactly the same, but it is a community. It's as close as you're going to get to community activity on the internet, outside of a group Zoom call or something like that. But, it's like you and I are talking, but, maybe 5,000 people or more are listening to this, and everyone feels like they're part of the conversation, and everyone's listening because they have an overlap of values in some way, so they don't feel quite as alone. And that's real, just because we're not all in a stadium, our physical bodies aren't all in a stadium together or something. I don't think it's any less real than if it was.
No, I agree. The podcasting is a connection. It's a connection that we're making with others, and we may not agree 100% with everything. Somebody might not agree everything I'm saying,
that's
but
fine.
They're listening. They're here. They're engaging in it. They might even write to you. They might reply, but they've been brought together instead of being alone. And the aloneness is the toxic thing,
I couldn't agree more. And that's something that everyone experienced a lot of recently. So, well, maybe that's a good place to put a bookmark in it. I mean, but do you have any specific, maybe, I don't want to say prescriptions, but maybe suggestions of, particularly as people come out of COVID and kind of put things back together, of maybe things to do, or maybe even just if they're interested in getting more involved in ceremony or group activity, that type of thing, like, how to begin approaching that?
Well, I think that's a great question and a great idea. I think people need to support their local pagan communities, or find their tribe, what they're interested in. People are doing all sorts of things. I mean, in the Northeast, they had Aloshas United, which it started pre-COVID, but people were, different Lukumi traditional people were meeting in cities and places to come together and sing and like share and have community. And then there's, in the pagan community, there's pagan gatherings. Find where they're happening. Go, find people of like-minded like you are, because I think that's a really important thing. Coming together and learning from each other and sharing and, running things by, especially if you've been isolated and you've been depressed and you've, felt like you didn't have anybody, that's how we're going to kind of like being more than just ourselves. We come together and we can make a difference. So I think those are ways that we could, find out, like, there's a lot of, I know PSG is happening this year. Earth Spirit they're actually having their spring gathering, which is a big one. And the registration ends at the end of the month. So definitely, that's in the Northeast, but they're all over, there's definitely things like that happening.
Great. Yeah, I mean, one thing
Parliament is happening in Chicago in August. If you're interested in doing that, definitely.
Oh, maybe so. Yeah, I need an excuse to go to Chicago. I've never been, actually. Great. Okay. Well, that was an excellent podcast. And then how can people find out, where can people get your book, and how can they find out more about you?
Thank you. Well, my book is available at Amazon and some select Barnes & Nobles. I think you could order it from Barnes & Noble. Through Llewellyn Publications, that's my publisher. My website is www.soulblossomcenter.com, and they can write to me at soulblossomcenter@gmail.com. And I will be at the Parliament, and I am having a book signing in Kingston at the Barnes & Noble on May 21st.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you very much for talking with me, and best of luck with the book and your projects.
Thank you so much, Jason. I really appreciate being on your show. It's been a great conversation. I've enjoyed talking to you as well.